On today's video, Southwest Florida is still struggling to recover from Hurricane Ian. More than a year after this hurricane, I recently took a drive to see how things are going along the coast of Southwest Florida, and I noticed that there are still entire boats in the mangroves. Right after Hurricane Ian, I toured every city in Southwest Florida and did a comprehensive report on the hurricane damage, so you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody that has seen as much damage from Hurricane Ian in the fashion that I was able to see it firsthand. And I'm honestly disappointed at how little progress Southwest Florida has made to recover from this hurricane. And on today's video, we're going to talk about why Southwest Florida has taken longer than expected to recover from Hurricane Ian. Both the Fort Myers Beach Pier and the City of Naples Pier are still completely gone, and progress in a new pier for both of these cities seems like a far-fetched idea at this point. Why has Southwest Florida taken so long to recover? Initially, we had press conferences from state governor and other officials telling everybody that everything was fine in Florida and things would get back to normal in no time. But now that the cameras are gone, the recovery progress is starting to look a little slow. One of the major things that's getting in the way is the fact that local officials cannot agree on a plan moving forward, with many of the locals wanting to rebuild exactly the way things were before, even though that didn't work very well. Right after Hurricane Ian, real estate prices did not adjust. In fact, there was a higher demand for real estate. However, today we're seeing that along the coast, dragging real estate prices, and these properties simply are not moving as people realize that for the next 3 to 4 years they're going to be looking at a complete site of destruction rather than a beachside paradise. With many people even fearing that before we even rebuild Southwest Florida again, we'll have another massive hurricane just destroy things before they're even rebuilt. The reality is clear that these coastal communities, especially places like Fort Myers Beach, will never be the same again. Tourism is gone. Entire buildings that had the base levels flooded are now closed. And well, we're probably going to see a lot of demolitions and lot clearing. And any new construction that starts on the island will probably be of a bigger magnitude, which is exactly what the locals initially did not want. A type of construction that for the most part was wiped away and landed miles off of its original site, with only the larger constructions and newer buildings withstanding the strength of a storm surge. Many cities like Fort Lauderdale have vegetation buffer zones and walls to protect in the case of a storm surge, and most Florida beaches have adapted a method like this to ensure that when they have a storm surge, their coastline doesn't get wiped away. However, in Southwest Florida, where many years ago there were houses, today those houses are literally in the water. Take the dome houses just south of Naples that were once on solid land and today are literally inside the water. That is because in Southwest Florida, they haven't invested in any type of coastal infrastructure that makes any sense at all. We're talking putting up some coconut trees and a few walls like they have in Fort Lauderdale. It actually looks appealing to the eye and it protects all of the real estate that sits behind it. But instead of a comprehensive and proven method to litigate these risks, what is Southwest Florida doing? Well, in the city of Naples and Collier County, they're talking about creating storm surge locks for the Cocohatchee River, which will just about destroy one of the most beautiful and scenic natural coastlines in the state of Florida, Wiggins Pass, which hasn't suffered from storm surge erosion in one bit. The only thing it's suffered from is the dredging that the same people who've destroyed the place, allowing access for boats of the rich and millionaires to come in and out of Wiggins Pass when it's naturally a pass that's about 2 feet deep and shouldn't be dredged, destroys the ecology of the area, and it prevents, with its shallow waters, everything from being washed out into the ocean. Nope, let's dredge it and destroy it so the rich people can get their boats in and out. So well, as you can see from driving through Fort Myers Beach, not only has Southwest Florida not recovered and they haven't built back, but the ideas that they're coming up with are borderline demonic. Projects into the billions of dollars that will forever scar the way Southwest Florida looks, and it will do absolutely nothing to prevent a real storm surge, since the water can simply go around the mangroves, and well, it will do absolutely nothing except for making those rich people feel like there's a barrier between them and the ocean when there really isn't. Now, we've seen other beaches throughout the entire state of Florida implement aesthetically pleasing, practical, and functional solutions to coping with storm surge, but the idiocracy of the people in Southwest Florida and the fact that things are done not by the word of engineers who understand how these things work, but what stupid people think needs to be done, ensuring that progress or even practical solutions are far from being attained in Southwest Florida. Most people don't know that Fort Myers Beach has one of the most complicated and practical permit processes in the entire state of Florida. I've worked for a company that I've had to pull permits and work with code enforcement and regional regulations in Dade County, which is one of the strictest places you're going to find. Naples, Collier County, extraordinarily strict. Coastal Bonita Springs, the city of Naples. Pretty much, these are very complicated areas, as well as Estero, Florida. However, despite working in all of these complicated places, the company that I worked for would not pull a permit on Fort Myers Beach. I had many customers approach me with great projects that we could have built on Fort Myers Beach, and we had to turn them down because the permit process for Fort Myers Beach is so endless, complicated, and unreasonable that even a company in the area that works in very complicated places would simply turn down customers on Fort Myers Beach because of how elaborate and extensive their permit process was before the hurricane. So now you have massive structural destruction of an entire city that has quite literally one of the most complicated permit processes in the entire country. And quite simply, one of the reasons things are not being rebuilt is because companies in Southwest Florida simply don't want to start the permit process on Fort Myers Beach because the reputation that they have for being ineffective. Most of the labor force in Southwest Florida was undocumented workers, and with the state's new stance on immigration, there literally isn't a labor force accessible. And if there was a labor force accessible, the people here in Fort Myers Beach also have a reputation of not wanting to pay enough money for the jobs, which means that most people avoid this area. People here in Fort Myers Beach think that everybody else is just at their disposal and they can pay them whatever they feel, or in some cases, not even pay them at all. And there's plenty of work on the mainland right now, both in Naples and Fort Myers, for contractors rebuilding, so why would you go work in a place that has some of the worst complications imaginable? Even during the initial cleanup effort, we saw people that came to Florida to work and they were turned down because the state of Florida did not want to issue them temporary work permits for out-of-state contractors, or even within the state of Florida, they simply were turning people down. They only wanted their people to be able to do the cleanup effort. We literally saw people that came from other states to volunteer with the cleanup effort, having them have to return because the cities simply wouldn't let them work without proper licensing. A thing that doesn't happen anywhere else in the country when there's a disaster, but it does on Fort Myers Beach. We saw clowns of different colors stand behind podiums. And when I say colors, I'm not talking white or black, I'm talking red or blue, and proclaim that they're going to do everything possible to rebuild these cities. But now that the cameras are gone and the clowns are back in Tallahassee or Washington, D.C., wherever they came from, we're looking at a situation on the ground that will take many more years than initially projected to recover. It is true that Hurricane Ian was catastrophically massive and unprecedented and more extensive than any other hurricane we've seen in the past. But even then, we've seen with hurricanes like Irma that were massive and other hurricanes like Charley at the rate in which Southwest Florida in the past was able to bounce back from these hurricanes, not getting stalled out like the Florida Panhandle. I really genuinely thought that when it came to rebuilding after a hurricane, we had a much better labor force in Southwest Florida than the Florida Panhandle. But it's turning out that that's no longer the case like in the past. In today's world, the bureaucracy of politicians and laws and restrictions have made it almost impossible for a place to recover effectively after a storm, where bureaucracy matters more than rebuilding. And while strict expectations are placed on homeowners trying to rebuild, when it comes to the city, their engineers can't come up with practical solutions to ensure that when these disasters happen, they have taken preventative measures to prevent the complete annihilation of these communities. These productive efforts have taken place along the Florida Panhandle on the Florida East Coast. But in Southwest Florida, we've noted a lack of coastal infrastructure. And when they do come up with a plan or have an idea, it's absolutely an idea straight out of a witchcraft book more than a practical solution. Other coastal communities in Florida have implemented these measures and they are safer and protected, but the properties here are completely exposed. So instead of taking proactive measures to ensure that there's enough infrastructure along the coast that other places in Florida have implemented, Southwest Florida continues on a destructive path where most likely these homes that are being rebuilt now could be washed away before they're even done rebuilding them again. You would think with the fact that they had a 14-foot storm surge come through here that their auto insurance rates and homeowners insurance rates would be rising. And while that is the case for people throughout the entire state of Florida, you would be surprised to know that people here along the coast, well, they didn't see their insurance rates go through the roof like you did, which means that you, the poor person in Florida, is actually paying for the rich people's cars when they get washed away. Your auto insurance rates may be rising in the state of Florida, but along the coast, the 300,000 cars or so that were washed away by Hurricane Ian, 358,000 cars, mostly along coastal communities, were flooded out, washed out to sea, or just completely disappeared during this hurricane. You would think that auto insurance rates on islands like Fort Myers Beach would be through the roof. But guess what? They're not. You know where auto insurance rates are through the roof? In communities that are Hispanic or Black in South Florida. When it comes to the world of real estate, there are regulations that prevent them from doing that. So they can't do it on the home insurance side. But guess what? They can do it on the auto side because there's no regulations in this type of insurance industry when it comes to racial situations, which means that you, the poor people of Southwest Florida, are paying the cost to repair the cars for the rich people along the beach. Basically, they got the poor people in places like Lehigh, anywhere that has a large Hispanic community or African American. You are actually the ones that are paying for those vehicles that washed away on Fort Myers Beach, and their insurance rates for autos are actually lower than yours. To give you an idea, the two vehicles that I had at the time of living in Fort Myers would have cost $157 to insure on Fort Myers Beach. However, it costs $528 to insure the same two vehicles far inland in Lehigh Acres where cars didn't flood. The South in general is the most dangerous place to drive in the United States, despite the fact there are no mountains and no snow. The roads in the South are dangerous because road safety simply isn't a priority in the South. Despite California having nearly twice the population of Florida, their accident mortality every year is roughly about the same as Florida. And that doesn't make a lot of sense because California's population is almost twice as much. They have landslides, they have mountains, rugged terrain, more trees and vegetation in a lot of places, which means there's more curves on the roads. There's no reason why Florida should be having roughly the same amount of people dying every year on the roads as California. Florida's accident mortality rate is actually 2 times higher than Alaska on the roadways, if that makes any sense. Especially considering that most fatal accidents occur on rural roads But at the end of the day, it's you, the poor person, who's going to flip the bill on 358,000 cars destroyed in Southwest Florida. And it really doesn't make sense why somebody who had their car washed away in a 14-foot storm surge would be paying a fraction of the insurance rate for vehicles as somebody in a far inland, higher area.
Well, there's a lot of insurance fraud, Jose.
Well, let's see. We're looking at about 4,000 accident fatalities throughout the entire state, throughout the entire year, versus nearly 400,000 cars. You do the math and tell me if that makes any sense. Every year in the United States, about 12 million cars are destroyed, which means that the cars destroyed during Hurricane Ian were about 1 in every 33 vehicles that was destroyed in the entire year. So a logical explanation would be for your auto insurance to go up $3. That's if we spread it out evenly throughout the United States. However, auto insurance companies are acting like everybody's insurance in the whole country needs to go up $50 because of this. A 3% increase throughout the entire year, I think, is an absorbable percentage of vehicles that insurance companies should be able to litigate this problem without having to make a huge deal out of it. Oh, and by the way, that $528, whatever the crap I was paying in Lehigh Acres, was before the hurricane. I'm sure they would have jacked it up afterwards. And we can assume that homeowners insurance would be proportionate to those percentages as well, since we have about as many vehicles as we do houses. After all, you are paying to insure these things, so it's not like you expect them to jack your rates up for doing what you were paying them to do to begin with. And it seems like more profit may be the answer these companies are looking for, rather than actually compensating for the losses that occurred during the hurricane. However you look at it, we know that their profits are going to continue to rise and your rates are going to continue to rise as well. And that unfortunately, the rebuilding process in Southwest Florida for a place like Fort Myers Beach really will take about as long as it would take in the Florida Panhandle, despite the fact we're closer to large cities like Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach that were not affected by these storms. We're starting to see the ineffective handling of these situations. And many people believe, like myself, that they're possibly doing this on purpose to keep the tourists out of Southwest Florida, which means that they're purposely going to make sure that these things take longer than they're supposed to because they simply do not want tourists on Florida roads. And sure, that might be fine for the rich people along the beach that are retired. It doesn't affect them. But what about the people that have to make a living off the only industry that exists in Florida? How are they going to cope with this situation of their communities not rebuilding? Well, we know that, frankly, there's a lot of people that depend solely on nothing other than tourism for a living, since Florida hasn't provided any other options. Are you disappointed with how long things are taking to rebuild? Let me know in the comment section.